right? So the bedin, like we said, when we talk about checks and balances, hakol kefi tzorech hashah, even though you cannot have capital or corporal or fine or punishment or fines outside of Israel, if there is a special need, you could do that. Not many people know. I think most people don't know that in Spain, up until maybe the 12th, 13th century, Jewish courts had the authority by the king. They had the authority to do that, and some of them did deal with and issued capital punishments. There were cases of executions by Jewish courts in Spain. And we always think that it ended with the Sanhedrin in Israel, but it did not. ואפילו כשרואים ליחיד שהוא פרוץ בעבירות, יכולים לכונסו כפי ראות עיניהם, ובלבד שתהיה כוונתם לשמיים. So now they start from, first, we speak about sort of a national crisis, that the Bedin has to step in because there's a problem at the level of the community or the level of the nation. But they say even if there's a one individual, שפרוץ בעבירות, who does, who sort of like uses the law to his advantage, they could issue a fine as they wish, as long as they're really honest and they try to pursue justice. And then he goes that אפילו אין בדבר עדות גמורה, even if there's no clear and direct evidence, it's circumstantial, רגליים לדבר, וקלה דלה פסיק, or if you have a rumor, ולקה אויבים דמפקה לקלה, and that person does not have specific enemies who would target him, but rather, meaning even when you hear rumors, there are different types of rumors. Some rumors are, you could say, could be corroborated or have a certain truth to them, and others are sound completely made up. So they have to decide on that. And אם נראה שזהו צורך שעה לדונו בכך וכך, צריכים לעשות כן אם יש יכולת בידם. So the bedin could overstep its authority and do more than what the legal code allows them to do. שאם נעמיד הכל על הדין ונצריך עדים והתראה, נמצא העולם חרב. So, according to the biblical law, the way the rabbis interpret it, for every transgression, every sin, whether it be to ben adam l'havero, ben adam l'hakom, whether it is an offense against God or against other human beings, you must have witnesses and admonition, meaning the person must be warned before the thing happened, before he does whatever he does, that if he does it, he's going to be punished, and he has to say, "I know, and I'm willing, or I'm not concerned about the punishment. I'm going to go ahead with what I'm doing." That's called edim v'atra. And so, and he quotes here the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, that if you follow this rule, ha'olam harev. That goes back to a statement that the Talmud makes regarding the process with monetary issues. The Talmud says, according to one opinion, that you have to thoroughly interrogate the witnesses, whether it's an issue of capital punishment or monetary dispute. So technically, if let's say we have a case of murder, and we have two witnesses, and the two witnesses cannot agree on the color of the shirt of the murderer, even though they agree on every other detail, then the case is dismissed for lack of evidence. And technically, it should have been the same thing in monetary issues. For example, if I borrow money from someone, and when he asks me to return to pay back, I claim that it never happened. He brings the witnesses who were there at the time of the loan, and they cannot agree on the color of my shirt at that day, even though they know the location of where the loan took place, then the amount of money. They can even tell exactly how many bills exchanged hands and what denominations, but they can't remember the color of my shirt, then the case will be dismissed. But the rabbi stepped in and they said, "Nimtzeta no'al delet bifnei lovin," that if we do so, then people will take advantage of that loophole. Borrowers will borrow money and will find a way to not pay back. And what will happen then? Nimtzeta no'al delet bifnei lovin. You will shut the door at the face of money borrowers, because the lenders will refuse to lend money for fear of not being able to collect the money once you follow the process. And if you do that, the whole economic system will come to a halt. So they said, we waive the need for thorough investigation. As long as you could say, there was a loan, and that was the amount you will have to pay. So now, why is it an important statement? Because someone could argue that if they would have followed the process, he would have been exempted. He would have been acquitted. And now that they waive the need for the process, he's paying, and maybe he's paying needlessly. And it could happen that when you apply such a change in the law, when you change the law to say we waive the need for thorough investigation, that some people will lose because of that. And the argument of the rabbis is that they have a responsibility to make sure that the whole system functions, and it's not that they are allowed to take money from person A and to give to person B illegally, but rather that there is a consensus of the people that by accepting the legal system, we all say that we are willing to lose small amounts of money once in a while in order for the economy to function and for us to be able to make a living on a regular basis. Does it make sense? Do we have equivalent in other systems? Those who know? Where?
Right, okay. I try to connect your last question to the just one more time. Ask that one more time.
I'm saying that the question is this: that we have a situation where the court rewrites the biblical code. Here it's the word of God. Sorry, you're not supposed to touch it, but the court rewrites the word of God, saying that the intention of the Torah was to benefit people, and the concern is that the economy will keep functioning, and if it doesn't, everybody's going to lose. So we have to give the lenders more security, that they know that the loans will be paid back. So we waive the need of thorough investigation. So the litigants, the defendant could say, maybe if you kept that obligation, I would not have to pay. But when you take that person in the context of the whole nation, we say the whole nation agrees. I mean, you don't have to have a specific agreement of each and every individual, but that is built into the idea of a legal system, that sometimes there could be a loss of money or possessions, but we're willing to let it happen for the greater good, right? So of course, if that person would be able to prove it eventually, of course we will accept his evidence. But as long as he doesn't have evidence, but he says that he was forced to pay for lack of evidence, we could still say that we are doing it for the greater good. So I don't know if we have an equivalent in the American system.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything equivalent in the. As you were talking, the first thing I was thinking of is the more ancient though example would have been the Torah to bridge the from the Yovel year.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to bridge the
right, same thing. It was the same idea, that they decided that if if the lenders will not pay, if the borrowers will not pay back, then the lenders will stop lending money. So they look at the purpose of the Torah, but they can't go against the word of the Torah. So if we want to take this in a more visual imagery, is that the rabbis basically, and the Talmud uses this rule. It's called hefker bedin hefker, which means that the bedin has the power to disown people of their property, right? They could say, you are an offender. As an offender, we confiscate all of your property, right? So basically, bedin could say, we confiscate the property of each and every Jew. It all belongs to us, and now we are redistributing it. So when we redistribute it, we leave most people with the money they had before, but in the case of the two litigants in front of us, right, we might distribute it differently than what would have come out according to biblical law. So, of course, it's a very dangerous system, because then you could use it to abuse your power, and it has happened before. A place where that has been used actually beneficially was with cases of aguna, that the rabbis would say, we nullify the kiddushim retroactively. How do we nullify the kiddushin? By disowning the husband of his property retroactively, and then it turns out that when he gave his wife the ring or the money or the gift or whatever it wasn't really his, and since she didn't get anything from him, then the marriage is null and void. So that was a good way to use it. Unfortunately, now everybody's afraid to use it, and it has to be reevaluated, and a decision should be made if we can apply it. But in any case, we go back to the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, "Im na'amida kol al adin v'netzrich adin v'atra nimtza ha'olam harev." We will devastate the world. So I think that the analogy to today's system would be that in many cases the litigation itself becomes a deterrent for a person to reclaim his or her property. Right? A lawsuit launched against someone, whether it's real or in vain, would say, okay, you start calculating, I'm going to pay so much in lawyers' fees. In some countries, the losing party will have to pay all of the lawyers' fees and all of the court fees, but not in America, as far as I know. So that is a problem where the legal system could be used against people. So he continues to say, "Velo harva Yerushalayim, ela mipnei she'amidu divrehem al din Torah." So it says this is an extreme statement that the destruction of Yerushalayim came about because they followed the law strictly. Veyesh lahem, he goes on to say this: Veyesh lahem reshut leyasro begufo umamono kefi sheroim ligdor hapirza. If there's a need to administer a physical punishment or monetary punishment as they deem necessary, they should do that. Now, how do we approach this whole issue of corporal punishment? We know when we look at the Torah never has never brings up the issue of corporal punishment for monetary offenses. And it seems that here they did that. They went above and beyond, not above and beyond, like they went out of the boundaries of biblical law. And I think part of it is really sort of a moral deterioration that came after the Tanakh. The Tanakh had, ideally, this is what the prophets were preaching, the idea of ethical values and the image of God and all that. And then after the Jews, first Hebrews, then Jews, then Israel, whatever they were called, have experienced the brutal destruction by the Romans, and then the tortures that were applied by the Romans, and then other conquerors. When you come to medieval times, in medieval times, torture was so widespread, was so common in the judicial system, that not until I think the 16th, mid 17th century, English philosophers or theologians started talking about the need to stop with that, with extreme methods of torture that people would apply even for borrowers, for people who couldn't pay their loans, and so on, for debtors, in other words. So probably, if medieval rabbis would come back today to life, they would have said, maybe it was a mistake to say that we could apply physical punishment. This is written in the 19th century, but sort of taking literally still from the earlier sources. And what I'm telling you about violence is a book I quoted several times. It's called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, where he speaks about the violence in the past and violence today. Is very interesting. Anyway, so they were allowed to torture him or to administer a fine. Ve'im hu alam, and here comes a very interesting statement that we'll see later on in next chapters. Im hu alam. Alam comes from the Hebrew word, it's not really Hebrew, Aramaic, alim, violent. In modern Hebrew, we use the word alim is violent. The rabbinical Hebrew would call it alam, and it seems like, I don't know if it's Aramaic, it could come from the word ilem, which means mute, someone who cannot speak. So alam in the reflexive is the one who causes other people not to talk. So he quiets them down, he silences them. So what if this person who comes to court, comes to Bedin, is a violent or strong or aggressive person who will not listen to Bedin? It's a very common situation where people come to Bedin. So I'm trying to get a better. We have situations where people come to Bedin and they're being told, this is what you have to do, and then they walk out and say, we're not going to do that. So I'm sure you've heard of the concept Arkaot Shel Nochrim, right? Civil court that the Jews are not supposed to go to. Have you heard of this concept? Yes? It's like some people, even today, speak about this as if it was idolatry. If you go to civil court, it's idolatry. And here, look at what Rabbi Epstein says. Imu alam osim al yedei arkaot hamelucha. If the rabbinical court does not have the executive power to force that person to follow the verdict, then you turn him over to the civil court. V'hem yetzavu alav aseh ma shedat Yisrael omer lecha, and they will tell him, they will force him to follow Jewish law. Now, that's not the full. It doesn't go the full distance yet. He will do later, because in this case, what he speaks of is we will decide the case, right, and we'll turn to the civil court to enforce the law. But we'll see later on if there is a possibility of asking the civil court to preside over the case from beginning to end. V'chol mi sheyesh koach beyado la'asod siyag laTorah ve'no oseh, and whoever has the ability to protect the Torah, he uses the word the wall, to build a wall or to a fence around the Torah, and he does not do that, en lo siyag ba'olam hazeh ve'lo ba'olam haba, he would not have any protective fences, ve'lo nin v'neched ve'atzur ve'azuv, he will have no descendants, no grandchildren, no possessions, nothing that will be ascribed to his name, and that he calls Bet Yosef b'shem Midrash HaNe'alam. This is a kind of formula incantations, warning people about beware. You have to make sure that justice is done. And here is an interesting phrase: "וכן מחויבים להשגיח שלא יימצא חלילה בין ישראל איזה מחשבת מרד אף בלב נגד אדוננו הקירה." Since Rabbi Epstein lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and since he speaks about the legal system and our authority, and when you turn them over to the judges, and he doesn't say yet that we could rely on civil judges to take care of everything. So he has to be careful not to insinuate that we are an independent, autonomous system of the civil system. So in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, religious sects had some kind of autonomy. It was also the norm in the Ottoman Empire. It's called the millet. Each religious sect had the right to have its own autonomous system, even though eventually they were all subjugated to the government. So he says here, we must make sure that there will be no mahshevet mered, no thought of rebellion, av balev, even as a thought, neged adonenu ha-keisar yavumodo, against our master, the emperor, his majesty, and his ministers. וכבר אמרו חז"ל שהקדוש ברוך הוא השביע את ישראל שלא ימרדו במלכויות. The rabbis already said that God made Bnei Israel take an oath not to rebel against the government. וכתיב ירא את השם בני ומלך, and he quotes a pasuk, fear God, revere God, my son, as well as the king. ומלכותה דהרעה כי אין מלכותה דרקיעה, and the kingdom here on earth is a mirror image of the kingdom of heaven. So very strong words to say that we abide by the law of the country, because he's afraid of retaliation. People read his material, there are censors that go through it, so we see that in his writing. What we see is, like I said, it's a healthy process of going through stages in the legal process and saying, okay, what we did last century is not good enough because we need to make sure that the system functions. Now here we go back to the checks. After the Bedin was given the authority to do whatever they want, he says this in Saif Bet, says v'choach ze hu rak legadol b'Torah or letovei ha'ir. This power, this authority is only given to someone who's a great scholar, or the Tovei Ha'ir, which they used to have an institution of sometimes Shiva Tovei Ha'ir, the 7 elected representative of the city, which were like a council that ran the city. Shetovei Ha'ir be'iram koham kevet adin gadol. That's a what we call a hidush. It's a revolution to make this statement that the elected officials are equivalent to the great court, to the Beit Din HaGadol, meaning vis-a-vis the city, they have this authority. And indeed, in many communities in Europe, and probably starting from the time when there was a breakaway from the Gaonim's hold, the Gaonim of Babel had a very strong hold on the communities in Europe up until the 10th century, and then during the 10th and 11th century, this it started falling apart. So, at that time, we see Takanot HaKehilot. It's a new genre of literature and of legislation, which is city or community decrees, which were not. Most of them were not about halachic, ben adam lamakom, but rather were economic and financial takanot. It was about fines, about the right of the territories, monopoly, alliances, contracts, witnesses, etc. So we have the famous community of Alisana. That was the Hebrew name. It was Lucena in Spanish. Is the first takanot that we have from the community. Lucena in Spain, I think mid-10th century. And then from there on you have takanot Tulitula, which is the Hebrew name for Toledo. And then we have in Europe the famous Shum, Shin Vavem is Speyer, Worms and Mainz. That got together, and then there was another famous is Siebenbürgen, which means the 7 cities. So either a community had takanot for its own community, or several cities got together. In Poland, the rabbis used to meet during the fair, and legislate takanot that controlled. They were basically trade agreements that they had. So it was limited to the leaders of the congregation, but not necessarily only to Torah scholars. So it's a combination of the Torah. Originally it says Rak legadol b'Torah or letovei, either the greatest scholar or the elected officials. But then he says bizmanenu mutal, in our days it is an obligation, it's incumbent upon the rabbi v'tovei ha'ir. So they have to do this sort of like a joint task force where you have representative of Jewish law and representative of the community of the financial and commercial interest, and they have to work on it together. And here it goes on. Whenever they impose a certain tax on the community, the community must follow. Even though one person might gain a little bit and another person might lose, because this is for the benefit of the community or to prevent a disaster from happening. So now, this seems a very, innocent or straightforward text, right? We have to all pull in, even though some of us might lose something because it's for the greater good. As it happened in reality, it wasn't so simple, because people always felt that there were certain groups, interest groups within the community. One of the strongest interest groups was the meat providers. There were there were many struggles around the meat tax, that the community would charge a special tax from meat selling and would give it to the shohatim in order to provide for them. But then it seems that there were all kind of alliances between the rabbis and the shohatim, the providers, the butchers. Until today, it's still a shady business. It's a business with a lot of money and a lot of influence, and it's a monopoly that pretends to be for the benefit of the public, but in reality benefits certain people within the system. Another thing that we have to have in mind, that at the time when we speak about medieval communities or new communities in Europe, up until not too recently, before the war, the First World War, the community had the authority to come into your house and to physically assess your value. Because if you recall the teshuvah that we reviewed last time by Rabbi Shmuel di Modena, 16th century Salonika, where he speaks about handing a person over to the authorities and saying that he owes money equivalent to the amount of the robbery, right? And why does he do that? Because this is because people were afraid of revealing their fortunes and their value to the authorities. So the the representatives of the community would go into people's homes and would physically take an inventory to see how much they're worth, because that's where they could really assess. I mean, as closely as possible to know how much money they have. Remember that back then most people did not have overseas bank accounts. They did have money overseas in some people, but not as people can hide money today. The equivalent that I could find today to that problem is that if any of you ever had to deal with the private Jewish school system, if you didn't, consider yourself lucky.
No, but I mean, I understand that when you're looking for a break on tuition or something, you have to submit all your financial documents and reveal everything.
Right.
So expose yourself financially. But I think more.
But I did the FAFSA, for example. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say a more appropriate example to modern day is the process by which you make improvements to your house. You have to pull permits at a county office, and based upon the permits you pull, they reassess the tax valuation of your home, and inevitably they raise the taxes on your home. They've never stepped foot in your house, but because you've had to pull construction permits of one sort or another, they know you're doing improvements.
Right.
And they know, and then they raise the taxes.
Right. But if you already use that, you also have, when you speak about the officials of a community, of a municipality, that's where you see a lot of corruption on a small scale. So people, like the person who's in charge of giving you the permit, would expect certain benefits in order to expedite the process, or in order to overlook certain problems. It happens all the time. That's the big problem of how do you make sure that justice sort of trickles down from the top, from where it's written to where it's really applied. And the example that I was giving is like when I did FAFSA and I did applications for private schools, and now private schools don't even bother going through your application. They send it to a company out of state that processes everything, and that company decides, because there were so many cases of people who have property, drive luxurious cars, but they say we can't pay the tuition, because we have to save for the trip to China, a month with National Geographic. So they had to do that. But in a way, so the first time I had to fill all these forms, I was thinking to myself that if the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Services, was the hand of the private Jewish schools, you wouldn't have any unwanted person in this country, because they're very, very thorough. They're very methodical. They would have everything, including, your relatives who live I don't know where. They know everything. So that is something that the communities used to do in the past. They do it today in certain things. But apparently, just because of the reason that I mentioned, that there were people who knew that there is corruption or nepotism, and obviously there were people who were themselves corrupt, but used that argument in their favor, meaning they would twist the system, and then when you would come and say we have to impose justice, they say no, the system is corrupt. So it's a problem. It says we have an echo of that in the writings of the Aruch HaShulchan. He says umisha me'akev bazeh o mekalkel, and anyone who tries to stop the initiative of, like, with collecting taxes, or he does something that will spoil that, and the mekalkel, the only way I can think of someone who puts an obstacle in the path of those tax collectors is by handing them into the government. But he doesn't say it openly, because we saw just 2 paragraphs above, he says we have no thought of rebelling against the emperor. So here he says anyone who tries to damage the system, uhavero shel Yarovam ben Nevat, is a companion to Yerovam ben Nevat, and that's a very, very interesting analogy. Why, of all people, Yerovam ben Nevat?
He was didn't want to say one of the kings of the northern kingdom.
He was the first.
First, and kind of so separated back. It was basically split. Ended up being a cause of the split.
Right.
Shlomo.
Right. And so what was? So the interesting thing, I say, why I'm saying it's interesting, because when you look at the Talmud and when they speak about Yerovam ben Nevat, he's reviled as the epitome of heresy. Yerovam ben Nevat is the one who has no share in the world to come. He's a heretic. He's a kofel. But so you would think it comes at it from that angle. So if you call someone Yerovam ben Nevat, he's not going to have a share in the world to come. He's a heretic. But what was the reason that Yerovam ben Nevat split the kingdom from Rehavam, the sons of Shlomo?
If I recall, it was because of taxes.
Exactly. It was because of taxes.
Heavily taxed.
Right. So you see, the IRS.
Those from Judah were not.
Right. Right. No, everybody was taxed heavily, both physically and monetarily. If you read the chapters in Melachim that correspond to that, you'll see there's a description of the daily meal of Shlomo. Hundreds of cattle and beef and birds, and it was a burden on people. And besides that, he recruited 700,000 people to work in Lebanon, cutting wood, cedars, shipping it to Jerusalem, bringing marble from the quarries. Maybe the numbers are exaggerated because we don't know that you had 700,000 people in the land at the time, but still, people came and asked Rehavam to alleviate that burden of taxes, and he refused. That's when he said the famous phrase, "My father tortured you with whips, and I will torture you with scorpions." Now I'll make it even more difficult. And as a result, they split. What happened after the split? Rehavam, the son of Shlomo, refused to acknowledge that the people broke away from him, so he still sent the tax collector, Adoniram, to collect the tributes and the taxes as usual, and that Adoniram was stoned to death by the people. And that was like it's the first Tea Party. Let's go this way, right? It's the rebellion against a foreign government or your own government because of heavy taxes, and eventually, people were killed and they broke apart and they established their own kingdom. I thought let's take a break here and reconvene